No mai whakarongo mai te whānau o te kona i purangi nei, tu tāne, ko apa wātine tōku ingoa. Welcome back to the family of the Becoming Tāne podcast. My name is Apa Wātine. This is the final episode, episode 8 of the first season of the Becoming Tāne podcast. This season was based in the Waikato Rohe. In this season, we have shared some amazing stories that will help grow great guys. As I mentioned last week, we'll be having a short break of 2 weeks between seasons. The next season will be in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, and we will look to drop episode 1 of season 2 on September 21st. Today's episode, we talked to Nick Reed. Nick has a great story to share. The title of today's episode is I Love You, Bro, and I'm Proud of You. Before we talk to Nick, let me give you a brief introduction. Nick was born in Whakatane. He has 6 siblings. He is the middle child. He went to Tauhara Primary School, and then when he left Whakatane, moved to Hamilton, he attended Fairfield College. He eventually went to Wintec, where he studied and received a Bachelor in Sports and Exercise Science. He also attended Waikato University, where he received a certificate in leadership, and he is currently studying towards an MBA. His work history is he's been a professional rugby league player, personal trainer, strength and conditioning trainer, a development officer for the New Zealand Rugby League, a boarding tutor, a youth mentor, and his current position is the health and fitness manager at Waikato University. He is married and he is expecting his first child in October of this year. Kia ora Nick, ngā mihi ki a koe, e te whakawhiti kōrero e tēnei rā. Hi Nick, thank you for speaking with me today.
Hey, kia ora Apa, and thank you for welcoming me onto the podcast. It's my privilege to be here.
I believe that we are who we are because of the sum of the life experiences that we have. So the first question is, what 2 events in your life has had the greatest impact on you?
I'll try and point out a good and a bad one. I believe that many of our bad or traumatic adversities that we go through actually lead to some of the greatest lessons in life. And the first one was an event which also culminated with one of the biggest decisions I've ever made. And that was as a 14-year-old deciding to raise myself, essentially. I got into a big disagreement with my mother, and by this stage we were in a single parent household. Without sort of going into too much detail, she was crossing some values of mine, and we had a massive breakdown at that point. And I made the decision at 14 to leave home. I moved in with my friends and their parents, and they fostered me until I was 16 and became an independent youth. But that decision to raise myself really set about a huge amount of flow-on effects actually around my sense of independence. So I built a strong sense of independence from that point. That helped shape my life, and I realized from that point on that if I wanted anything in life, I would be depending on myself to get it, and have since worked as hard as I can to chase whatever it is that I want. One of the other things that sort of helped shape me massively in terms of events is the marriage to my wife. Like a lot of young Māori men who had suffered some traumas, was a pretty angry young man, and often used it as motivation to fuel me. And that became a little bit more and more difficult when I met my partner, because I found that I wasn't so alone in the world, and that I could be authentically me, and I could be at home and vulnerable around her. And being married and making that commitment means that I get to experience this world with somebody else. And so in terms of 2 events that sort of helped shape me, those are 2 of the biggest ones for me.
You mentioned about feeling alone. Did you actually feel alone, or was that more of a state of mind?
It was a combination of both. My father passed when I was 8 through alcohol poisoning, and Mum was an absolute soldier for the next 4 years trying to do her best. But I largely learned what I did about the world through experiences at that point in every facet. And home wasn't always a pleasant place to be. We had no power often. I think at 11 read the Bible 6 times in 6 months because we had no power. So no TV and no hot water. And so I often didn't spend a lot of time at home. I spent it out in the area. And they say every child is raised by a village. And I was certainly raised by the village of people around me. But I never truly felt a sense of belonging, actually, to any one group of people. I felt often left alone, and that I suppose that was my earliest perception, is that people didn't necessarily care for who I was, but for what I did. And so I created a life of productivity and producing stuff.
Being authentically you, what has that meant to you over the years?
It's been the understanding, actually, that I don't have to be this material version that I kind of grew up wanting to achieve. I grew up chasing riches and money, because for me it meant stability in a world that I just never had. Being authentically me, for me, has been a growing process, and one where I get to not be the guy who always produces stuff. I don't necessarily have to be a superstar or have to be achieving things continuously, and feel okay to still be loved and worth something. And that's actually been a great insecurity of mine.
Has it been easy for you to be authentically you?
Oh, definitely not. Definitely not. It sounds quite cynical, actually, but I have a genuine distrust of people most of the time. I've learned to trust myself a lot, and so trusting others has been quite difficult. I always have a plan B in case people don't follow up on their word, and that anything that people actually deliver for me has always been a sense of a bonus rather than an expectation. In terms of being authentically me, if you were to ask 8 different people who Nick Reed is, you'd probably get 8 different answers, and they would all be true. I'm all of those things, and they just happen to be different faces that I tend to flex at different times.
Where did that not trust of others come from?
Probably, I believe the distrust of others really just came from being let down over and over again. I was like many young Māori men, the kid who, when he fell over, wasn't uffied or picked up and patted on the back saying that things are going to be okay. It was, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about type thing. And as a result, I never learned to self-soothe. I learned very quickly that was going to get me nowhere, and to deal with my emotions, that essentially people aren't going to care. And so that's actually something that I'm trying to manage and work myself through, because it's not actually that helpful when you're a bit older.
Self-soothe, what does that mean?
It's an ability to actually control and handle your emotions. There's an ability for people to experience emotions, and then at the end of that come out of it, whether it's anger or sadness or anxiety, and then be like, but it's okay. I'm going to be okay, and then move forward. That self-soothing process doesn't happen for me. I actually go straight into fight, flight, or freeze, and so I get very angry and confrontational. I then, to cover my pain or my hurt, I then try to run away and isolate myself and get away from people. And the next experience or stage for me is numbness. And anytime someone kind of breaks into my space or to my hole, whether it's supportive or not, I perceive that as a threat. And I'm starting to learn actually that that's not all that useful, and that it's okay to be helped by people.
Now, I mentioned earlier that you're about to be a father for the first time. What type of father do you want to be?
I think ultimately I would like to be the father that I wish I had when I was a kid. One who comes to the rugby games and stands on the sideline. The father who's, I suppose it's more about time and caring than anything else. I would like my child to see me as dependable and as supportive, regardless of what it is they choose to pursue. And I suppose my job is to create opportunities to empower them to pursue whatever it is that they want to.
So who has shaped your view of fatherhood?
Probably the earliest shape of what it means to be a man, actually, is probably a better descriptor for me, was my older brother. And he's 10 years older than me. And when I was a kid, I just saw the way that people treated him. He was young, good looking, athletic, and just seemed to be able to achieve what he set his mind to. He was the first example of someone that I could resonate with, who had gotten himself out of poverty through his own hard work, being very successful in a Western sense. But probably what I was most attracted to was the way that people interacted and treated him. And it was with great respect. And he was really tough, but he was also, kind and caring, and his ability to contribute back to the whānau is something that has made him a leader. And although we didn't have a strong relationship when I was a kid, and that didn't develop till I was a little bit older, he did it mostly just through his role modelling.
Within the Waikato area, there are a number of organisations that are supporting men in their journey. One of these organisations is the Male Support Services of Waikato. The founder and manager of the organisation is Mike Holloway, and he is here to share with us what their services is all about.
It started because there's no support for fellas out there. Everything was pretty much perpetrator based. Being a survivor myself, I had to go through the ropes with my family, and we were virtually asked to set something up. 2008 was when we registered the trust. At the beginning, it was just myself, and it was just one-on-one with other survivors and virtually walking some of the journey with them. There's guys who have been sexually abused as kids or at some stage in life, and we're not talking about perpetrators, we're talking about victims. The trust has really grown, so we still do the one-on-ones. We've got 3 or 4 groups going. We also support the families. We do social work, do anything that will move the guy forward, court work, anything. It's growing, so we're getting about 2.5 referrals a day. So we're looking at perhaps a new building. I want to grow the work in prisons. We extended it from sexual abuse to physical, mental, emotional and domestic abuse. So we need to try and hook them with the DHB, schools, etc., and look at kaupapa Māori arm.
If a guy wants some support here in the Waikato, Hamilton region, how do they get in contact with you?
We don't have a lot of paperwork for referrals, so it's just a phone call or an email or a text or on the website, just a quick notification, and we'll contact them and then we'll sort it out from there. We make it as easy as possible. www.waikatosurvivors.org.nz 0800 677 289. The trust is a taonga for our men in the Waikato, and what we're trying to do is saying Waikato look after their men.
The website again is waikatosurvivors.org.nz, and their number is 0800 677 289. Kia ora, welcome back to the Becoming Tāne podcast. In your work history, you identified as being a professional footballer, where you played rugby league for Sydney Roosters and Cronulla Sharks. Tell me about that experience, and did you achieve all that you wanted to in your football career?
They were some of the best years of my life, actually, and in fact I've got some tattoos on my ribs from a couple of those league clubs, the Sharks, the Redcliffe Dolphins and the Orara Valley X-Men, because they were, to me, like my whānau, where I felt like I transitioned into a man. The Sydney Roosters was I spent some time at both of these at under 20s level and trained with the first grade squad at the Sydney Roosters, and I'd gone from pushing trolleys 6 months earlier and playing club rugby league as a 17-year-old to riding in a Porsche with Anthony Minicello back to the train station. And he was one of my favourite players. I'd watched him play for Australia and New South Wales 6 months earlier, and all of a sudden I was sitting in his car. And it was a real shock to the system. I went from being this, by this stage, 18-year-old young Māori boy, standing in a team full of stars, playing next to Mitchell Pearce and telling guys like Anthony Tupou and stuff like that where to run around. And I was too starstruck. I saw these guys as something probably beyond human, these superstars with superpowers. And I really struggled actually to rein in my awe of them. And that was ultimately what led me to not getting my contract renewed at the Sydney Roosters. I really struggled to feel like I was part of the team. I felt like an outsider and almost as if I had imposter syndrome. And so I left, went back to club rugby league and got another shot with the Cronulla Sharks actually the following year. And that was mostly in their under 20 side. And at that time, for a young man who had gone from pushing trolleys and earning nothing to earning a little bit of money and hanging around with NRL footballers, I quickly got swept up in the lifestyle actually of drugs, alcohol and womanizing, and had nobody to really keep me grounded. And ultimately I continued to lose this battle. I tried for a few more years to really crack on professionally, and my second chance was playing Queensland Cup for one of the Brisbane Broncos feeder clubs, the Redcliffe Dolphins. And gradually what I learned is that I was just on a conveyor belt of really talented players trying to crack it. And for every 25 that are in the under 20s, only 2 of them will go on to play NRL. And so I ended up accepting, not straight away, but accepting that I was one of the 23 who never would. And that was partly why I moved back to New Zealand to do a sports science degree. Did I achieve everything in the game? I think I put myself in the best position to achieve as much as I could. But talent, sort of only gets you so far. And when it got to the big leagues, I actually found that I was lacking in a lot of the areas that really mattered. And when you're athletic and young, I carved up against normal club players. But when you're 78 kilos playing against guys who are 100, 110, built with lean muscle, you lose that battle physically every day of the week. And I didn't quite have the skill set to make that next step. So awesome experience, but no, I'm really sort of pleased with how it all went, and I don't have any regrets whatsoever.
Now, I believe that we're all born with a superpower. I define a superpower as a particular skill, ability, or attribute that makes you you. It's your secret sauce. It's what people remember about you. So my question to you is, Nick, what is your superpower?
Probably the most fascinating thing about this is other people would say different things. They might say that one of my greatest superpowers is that I just seem to be really good at everything. One of those annoying kids that seems to win at athletics and swimming and chess. And it's kind of annoying that they always win everything. I was that kid. But what people don't sort of see is actually that behind, or the driving reason behind the reason why I tended to win a lot of things, was that I grew up in a world of poverty and I avoided being at home, and I spend a lot of time behind the scenes in the dark, just working on whatever I can, to be good at everything. So I believe there's two things that I actually genuinely think I'm pretty good at. And one of them is an ability to withstand or tolerate suffering. I find myself to be one of the hardest workers in the room because I'm prepared to sit there and tolerate it more than others. And the other one's actually a general knack for efficiency. I find that no matter the situation, I can walk into a room and find very quickly more efficient ways to make things happen, whether it's on a sporting field or whether it's in a business sense.
I did speak to your wife about her thoughts towards your superpower. She actually gave me 3. And this is what she said about your superpower. She said, Nick has a gift of inspiring and motivating others. She said that others that know her before she was with you and know her now would say she is a completely different person. And she says she is the different person because you have a lot to do with it. You are very driven, and that inspires her and motivates her to be driven as well. So that's the first one. The second superpower, she says, is that you are like a sponge for information. And whether it is information from books or podcasts, you just soak it all up. When you study, you're an A student, you absorb everything, and you're a wealth of information. The last one she says is that it's about your openness and honesty. You have taken a number of journeys in your life that other men may not be open to, and you are not afraid to take those journeys, and you're not afraid to tell others about them. And this openness is inspiring for her. So that's what she sees in you. You see something different in what your superpower, that of suffering and that of being able to nail things down, is quite different to what she sees you as. Why do you think the difference?
I think probably the biggest difference is that I internalize all my motivations for doing things are probably something that nobody sees, and that the observable behaviors or the actions that come about are actually what people see and may probably remember me by. And so they'll see what the end consequences without actually the reason behind why I do them.
In your LinkedIn page, it said the following thing about you. You empower everyday people to develop well-being strategies. What does that mean?
It was a great, attractive tagline, actually, to let people that I don't quite know how to articulate or summarize what it is that I do. But if I was to try and explain it, I'm really, really big on holistic well-being. And that's just everything ranging from, your spiritual self, particularly the Te Whare Tapawhā model, because it's easy to follow. And I suppose I've enjoyed the journey of learning, largely about myself and the strategies that work for me. And a lot of that has actually been, through Te Taha Tinana, or the physical realm. And that is the controlling of my physical activity, the nutrition, all of the things that I can directly control, when I go to bed, what it is that I put in my body. And in terms of trying to find sort of happiness or holistic well-being, there's a lot of people out there searching for something. And I find that there are just some things that I can resonate with and relate to, and I can teach people or show people the way for them to help themselves if they're open to accepting particular methods. Now, certainly no guru, particularly when it comes to intrinsic motivation or health, but I do know a number of quick tools to get quick wins and quick successes to hopefully help people get started on their own journeys and pathways.
What is vulnerability?
For me, vulnerability is it's a sacred place where you will let out your emotions with the people you trust around you. So it's quite a sacred area for men in particular.
Vulnerable is when you let your guard down and you allow some other people to see your weaknesses.
Vulnerability for me is someone that places themselves in that space or that state of being with the intention to either want help for themselves or wanting to give help to others by being vulnerable.
To me, I get the greatest joy in helping others, but one thing I really struggle with is being helped. So that's when I'm vulnerable. To me is when I'm actually willing to allow someone else to help me.
It's going to sound bad, but I don't think I know what that means in this context. To me, it's a weakness. To me, it's an area of your life that you need to shore up and strengthen.
To me, it means mental strength, being able to lay bare all your darkest moments.
Vulnerability to me is true power.
What is your definition of vulnerability? Kia ora noa, ko te kōna ipurangi nei tū tāne. Over the last few weeks, the whole 25 push-up challenge has been going crazy on social media. And I see you finally got the nomination. I really enjoyed your post about your reasoning behind being involved in it. Why did you feel a need to provide an explanation?
Yeah, it's actually something I've been nominated in for a wee while now, about 4 weeks ago, and something that I've avoided, partly because I don't like buying into chain trends, but also because it's a topic that was quite sensitive to me because I was going through my own health challenges at the time, particularly around anxiety and depression, and have since been medicated. But finally, someone who I truly respect and spent a lot of time in the middle of a rugby league field with nominated me, and I felt obliged actually to do something because he had called me out. And what I realized actually is I'm not, or never had been sure how the 25 push-ups itself directly relates to mental health awareness. But I do know there's a couple of things that really helped during my journey. And when I was feeling alone in the dark, and there's that sort of terminology again, feeling alone, there were a couple of things that helped pull me out, at least to a state where I was willing to ask for help. And one of those was my wife caring for me for several days actually, and eventually just coming and hugging me without expectation of anything in return. That was enough to open up to my brother, and then him giving me a little bit of information about how he's dealt with things in the past, and all of a sudden I didn't feel alone. And so it was a quick reach out to those who are struggling, just to say, hey, I'm aware that I'm someone who is fairly influential in our community, and I think everybody's aware that we have the highest suicide rates in the world, and it's particularly prevalent in Māori. It's not enough to make people aware. We're already aware. Let's be proactive if we truly care, and just reach out and try and reach out in a way that doesn't come across as condescending.
You opened up to your brother, and what happened when you did open up to him?
He had messaged me the day before, and something I suppose that people need to realise is if you're struggling with anxiety, is you avoid texts, phone calls, and you actually isolate yourself. You avoid people because you're scared that they'll see you. And so I ignored his message until the following day. I had made a promise to my wife that I would at least reach out and try to pull myself out. And so I texted him and I said, actually, bro, I'm not doing too well. I've been going through a really rough time, but I've decided to seek out some professional help. And his message back was, hey, here's some of the things that I've experienced. And it felt like he was telling me my own life story. And I think the most valuable words at the back end of it were that I love you, bro, and I'm really proud of you. And A, I didn't feel alone, and B, when he told me that he loved me and that he was proud of me, it's one of those things that I've struggled to hear throughout my life, and I think actually that most men struggle to hear. We certainly don't tell each other enough that we are proud of each other for really basic things, and so that was a big one.
You brought up earlier when you were younger that you like read the Bible 6 times in 6 months. Are you still quite spiritual in a formal religious sense?
I'm just spiritual. I've always admired actually religion because of the let's say the certainty and faith that people have. It's like a sense of higher calling, and that when, I suppose one of the things that I've loved is that when people face adversity, what do you do and how do you overcome this? And they're just, particularly because a couple of influential family members, friends, believe wholeheartedly in the Lord, they kind of just be like, it's okay because my purpose is to serve, God, and my purpose is this, or I may not know what my purpose yet or what I'm suffering for currently, but I'm sure that I'll learn in time. And the certainty that you get sort of from religion is fantastic. And I think spirituality has been something that I have really kind of struggled to really comprehend and understand. And over time, it kind of started for me as, who am I? What is my identity? When I'm not my work and I'm not a footballer and I'm not these things, who am I? And that kind of gave me some starting points or some insights to really reconnect actually with my whenua and to start going back to Ruatoki, because I started to realize no matter which way I ran from it, I always felt disconnected, and I needed to reconnect. And the only way that I would begin to feel like I was home would be to visit so often actually that I stopped feeling like a visitor.
Why did you feel that you ran from your Māori side?
Yeah, I think this is actually a really common one for a lot of Māori men who aren't necessarily connected to their whenua or to their marae. But for me, it was the fact that I can't speak te reo Māori, not fluently, and so I couldn't meaningfully contribute to things happening back home. The older I got and the less time I spent back in Ruatoki, the tougher it got for me to feel comfortable. I missed the stages in life when you're a young boy and you're shown how to be a man on the marae. And as I got older and older and all my material success increased and improved and became my armor, it actually made me more and more aware that I was even more vulnerable when I went home, because people actually from our marae and from our whānau don't care about the flash car that I drive, how much money I earn, and all those Western methods of success. It's actually about how much you contribute back to your whānau. And what are you doing? You earn respect by cleaning the toilets and looking after your manuhiri. And I was doing none of that. And so all of a sudden, in this world where I was quite successful, the Western world, I was afraid of going back to the Māori world or te ao Māori and being nothing or nobody. And so I avoided it for a long, long time.
My name's Darren Paiwai. I own and run Daz's Barber Shop. It's a mobile barber service. I started by cutting my son's hair from a very early age, and just wanted to be better at it. And it wasn't until my good wife said, hey, you better go get your tohu. So sent me off to Auckland. My passion is to help people, so I've developed a business that I can sort of go out and help people. So I went into the local kura and plucked a couple of boys out who sort of didn't have a passion of being in school. I gave them a go, and then I sort of taught them not only to cut hair, feel confident in cutting hair, but it's more so the conversations you have with people that come into your seat. If you can hold a genuine conversation with your customers, then you're winning at the barber game. A lot of people think if you can cut hair, then you're an awesome barber. The reason why I did start a barber business because I wanted something that target fathers, young men, to come into this profession and sort of hold their hand in the business sector and coach them through that side while they enjoyed cutting hair and still living that dream. My first week I opened up in Hamilton, I had people come in at 11 o'clock and not leave until 3 o'clock. Just come in and just talk about anything, really. Just through experience, I've come to the conclusion that there's times to speak and there's times to listen. It's that art of being able to read that situation. I have one in Hamilton, and that's just freshly opened up, so we're parked outside the Melville Club Rooms on Collins Road. I aim to have more of those in the Hamilton region by the end of this year. The other one is down in Whitehall. It's in the Hawke's Bay. So that one just goes all day, non-stop. My barbershop model is a lot different to other barbershops that I see out there now. I'm really here to help others because I really, really feel that if I help someone else and they succeed, then I succeed. And when I succeed, they succeed. And I can genuinely say that too. So if anyone's out there who wants to and interested, then come and hit me up.
You're listening to the Becoming Tani podcast, so welcome back. I believe that life is one of our greatest teachers. So with that being said, now what has life taught you so far?
I think probably a quote that I read in a book recently summed it up for me pretty well. And that's actually that the solution to a problem is the creation of another. And that life is actually just full of problems. And that when we solve these problems, we get happiness. But we only get happiness from the problems that we choose. And so I've come to the realization actually that happiness isn't actually a destination, that no materialistic thing can help me feel happiness, that I'll get my happiness from creating these problems, and it's an ongoing, infinite cycle. And when you at least get to choose your pain or your suffering because you get to solve this problem, at the end of it, the payoff is worth it.
If the listeners were to take one message away from our kōrero today, what would you want them to take away?
Usually I'm a practical man, and so I would say if you could take one thing away from this, it would be something that you could apply virtually straight away, and a thing that I would say that has helped me a lot actually in terms of my intellectual and intellectual growth or sense of well-being is actually Audible. I would say download Audible or download a podcast. A couple of referrals I've got. One of them I spoke about sort of pre-show was The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And if it's about career or if it's just about being or wanting to be a better person in general and finding some metrics to measure yourself and coming up with a better way of being, then that is an absolute perler of a book.
So the name of the podcast is called Becoming Tani. And I named it Becoming Tani for a couple of reasons. One, Tani Mahuchi's desire to learn and grow. And two, because Tani is the Maori translation for male or man or husband. So with that being said, in your opinion, what does it mean to become a man?
I think when it comes to man, it's about going through a journey and discovering actually what kind of man it is that you want to be and what values actually that you live and you want to be true to. My version of what it means to be a man is to be 4 different things, and that's to be a warrior, a lover, a magician or a joker, and also a king, and a good king. All 4 of those different things kind of make me up, and I would love my children to say or to think of me as the kind and caring and loving man that they feel comfortable to be vulnerable with and to speak to, a sense of stability and a pillar of strength within my whānau.
Just following up on that, those 4 divisions of being a man, did you get that from anywhere?
Yeah, yep. Actually, there's an author, a Catholic author actually called Richard Raw, who talks about essentially the different components of man, and Those are four of the components, and each of those are representative within us, but we can decide which version of those we are. There's a light and a dark to each of them, and you can be a really strong and good king and worthy leader, but you can also be a tyrant. And we have both equal opportunity to travel down both roads, but where we end up is ultimately and can be decided by us.
Thanks, Nick. I really, really appreciate your time. I really appreciate the insight that you've given us today. I wish you all the best on your journey. I wish you all the best on becoming a father and becoming the leader that you want to be. So kia ora, ngā mihi ki a koe.
Awesome. Thank you, Apa.
Ngā mihi kia koutou katoa. Thank you to all. I would like to thank everyone for listening to the podcast. I really appreciate your support and kind words. I'm so proud that we've been able to make it to the end of season 1. I would really like to thank the men who I interviewed this season for the podcast: Johnny Gillette, Matt Tabram, Tabai Madsen, Watson Ohia, Ezra Hirawani, Seth Haynes, and today, Nick Reed. I feel privileged that you trusted me, a novice, to share some of your story. I would like to also give a big thank you to Aaron Moike and Kano Sadler for editing and providing the music for my podcast. I would like to also recognise Simon Kepa and Jep Savali, who have supported me with this podcast. I would also like to recognise the Hui Ora team, Tuihana Ohia, Nina Keitane, and Che Wilson. Finally, last but not least, my wife and my kids, Gail, Aroha, Apanui, Tipini, and Wairete Rose. Please remember the website of the Becoming Tāne podcast is www.becomingtane.men. Our email is info@becomingtane.men. Our handle on Facebook and Instagram is @becomingtane. And for the final time this season, please subscribe and tell your whānau and friends that you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and iHeartRadio. Mō ora.